Thomas gets a little more attention than Andrew. I think that's because Thomas may or may not have been a wine keeper or a wine dresser. If you watch the show The Chosen, which I'm not a fan of because I think they take way too many liberties with the source material. But if you do watch The Chosen, they portray Thomas as a wine keeper or a wine dresser. That may or may not be true. It could be. He very well could have been. In biblical texts don't say what his profession was. But we do know he was at the marriage of Cana, and we do know that he was familiar with the miracle there when it comes pertaining to wine. And right after that, he becomes a disciple of Jesus. So he may have been the wine keeper at that wedding. But we don't have any evidence that explicitly says that was his profession. Also, Thomas gets a lot of slack or a lot of good natures and sometimes not good natured teasing because he's doubting Thomas, right? After the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, when the other disciples tell him what happened, because he wasn't there the first time at the dinner, he says emphatically that unless I see it for myself and touch his hands myself, I'm not going to believe it's true, right? I don't necessarily think that's, doubting Thomas. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw. I mean, let's be honest here. Let's not, overstate our case. I'm missing something? I think I am. Because that doesn't fit there. Let's flip back a few pages. Oh, okay. That goes there. So I think that is a reasonable doubt. All right. I don't think that is a unreasonable doubt on his part. I think he was justified in having that doubt. Because if my friends came to me and said, hey, that guy we publicly saw die a few days ago, we just saw him back to life. He ate with us last night. I might be inclined to think they've lost their minds, right? I might be inclined to think they have went, plumb crazy. I think that would be a reasonable conclusion, right? Like, you guys are overcome with grief over our best friend and our mentor dying and being executed by the Romans. I think you've lost your mind, right? And they insist, no, we saw him, we ate with him. And finally, Thomas looks at him and goes, unless I see it for myself, unless I touch his hands myself, I don't believe you. And I personally think that is a reasonable conclusion, right? Like, unless I know for certain, unless I have undeniable facts, undeniable evidence, I'm not inclined to believe. Right? However, let's back up a little bit. All right? Let's back up right before the Holy Week, right before Passover, right before they go to Jerusalem. They are in Bethany, and you can find this in John chapter 11. All right? In John chapter 11, they're in Bethany hanging out, and it's a known thing. They know that the religious leaders want to kill Jesus. They want him dead. This is a known thing at this time, right? And they're debating on what to do. And Jesus says, I have to go to Jerusalem to fulfill my mission that I'm here on earth for. And all of the disciples, except one of them, says, no, you can't go to Jerusalem. They're going to kill you. And Jesus insists he has to go to Jerusalem. Well, there's one disciple that says, let's go. Throw down, let's go. And that is Thomas. So is he really a doubting Thomas? No. He's, give me justification. Give me a reason. Give me a basis, right? Because he is the only disciple that's recorded saying, let's go. Matter of fact, not only does he say, let's go, he says, if you have to go to Jerusalem and you're going to die there, then let's go die together. He is fully expecting to die with Christ. Go to Jerusalem and die with Christ. Now, shortly after that, about a week later, a little less than a week later, does he turn tail and run in the Garden of Gethsemane like literally everyone else? Yes, he does. But that does not change the fact that when everyone else in the room was saying, hey, you can't go, you can't do that because they're going to kill you, it is Thomas. It is Thomas that says, let's go. Right? But you have to, I think it's a good idea for us to look at what is happening before that, leading up to where the narrative in the Bible leaves off. Thomas is the only one that says, let's go. So I would have a hard time coming to the conclusion that Thomas doesn't maintain that after the resurrection, that let's go. If you're going to die, I'm going to die with you mentality. Excuse me. All right, so when do we pick up with Thomas later? Well, similar to Andrew, the mention of Thomas is in Acts chapter 1. And then there is speculation after that. I wrote this. The strongest indication is he traveled to India and was speared to death. This oral tradition was passed down in India up until written language was introduced by the Portuguese in the 16th century. So in case you're unaware of the India subcontinent, they had a very strong oral tradition and did not have a written language until Portuguese was introduced in the 6th century. But that strong narrative, even today, you can go to India and you can find churches that claim to trace their origins back to the Apostle Thomas, or as they would call him, Saint Thomas. So I think it's reasonably certain that he did go to India as an evangelist, as an apostle of Christ. And that is why we don't really, we don't have mentions of him in most of Acts. The other part of Acts is Acts follows mostly Peter and then almost exclusively the actions of Paul, because Luke is a traveling companion with Paul, the author of Acts. So Paul is headed to Rome. As soon as Paul comes onto the scene and is converted to Christianity, he's headed to Rome, right? So that is the exact cardinal opposite direction of India. So to me, it makes sense that Acts wouldn't be talking about Thomas and what Thomas is doing, because it's literally in the opposite direction that Luke is traveling with Paul. So We also have another source. It's called Acts of Thomas. It's from about 225 AD. That's where we get the speared to death. The Council of Trent with the Roman Catholic Church have declared the Acts of Thomas to be heretical works and probably pseudographical, meaning they weren't actually written by Thomas or really about Thomas, but they were, somebody fan fictioning, basically. I ask a question here in this paper. I'm going to read it. How many manuscripts or traditions which give an alternative death to Thomas have been found? The answer is none. Just like Andrew, alternative deaths with Andrew, there are no manuscripts or historical evidence contradicting the account that Thomas was speared to death by the Indian monarch. The biggest hesitation, so I would be like McDowell and McDowell, I would put Thomas in the same category as Andrew, as it's likely. We have more reason to believe that that's what happened than reason to believe that's not what happened. But at the same time, I would not put it in the certain category like I would say Paul or Peter. And that's mainly due to lack of evidence, not evidence to the contrary. We have no evidence to the contrary. We just don't have a lot of evidence supporting that conclusion. Thomas, similarly to Andrew, I put him in the same category as McDowell and McDowell, in that likely category. John Foxe with Book of Martyrs says it with certainty that that's what happened. DC Talk back in, I think, the early 2000s released their Book of Martyrs. They get a lot of evidence from John Foxe, Book of Martyrs, with their Jesus Freak book. They also record that they both died in an X-shaped cross, the St. Andrew's cross, and speared to death with Thomas. But like I said, their primary source is John Foxe's Book of Martyrs. I think it is likely, but not certain.